Right, I think we can get started with the basics, the admin part of the SaaS camp. Welcome, everyone. Super exciting to see so many of you on the line. This is the first session of this spring's SaaS camp, and super exciting to be hosting this fireside chat. Probably one of the reasons why I'm really excited about this is because I've actually worked at RELEX for 4 years in the past, and I've been such a fan of the company since day one. And so I'm just super excited to be able to interview Johanna and get to share the parts of the success story with the Nordic and Baltic SaaS community. A few housekeeping rules maybe first before we kick off the discussion. We have the whole session will be Q&A style, but besides the questions that I have prepared for Johanna, would be really nice to engage the audience as well. So whatever questions you might have for Johanna, just write them in the Q&A tab, and I'll make sure that we cover them either during the chat or then at the end. I hope that we have some time for a proper audience Q&A session. So that will be nice. And then everybody's going to get a recording of this session, so you can get back to the best parts and the most useful insights afterwards. So that's nice. But let's get into our actual part of the webinar, why everybody's here. So happy to introduce you, Johanna Småros. I'm gonna introduce you first, and then I'm gonna let you fill the spots that were left blank in my introduction. So, Johanna is a co-founder of RELEX. She has a supply chain scientist background. That's heavily linked to how RELEX was originated, but I'll let you discuss more about that later. I think you've done quite a bit of work in all parts of the different parts of the organization. I actually read somewhere that you wrote the first line of code in the software at some point. So I think that's a pretty good start. I was obviously working with Johanna a lot when you were leading the marketing team, and then you've done lots of sustainability initiatives in the past, as far as I know. But as a human, I think you're really pragmatic, down to earth, and just really honest and humane. But I think that's super nice, because I would describe probably RELEX with those exact same attributes as well. So it really culminates a lot to you and the other co-founders as well. But let me know what I missed in my introduction.
Oh, I think you did really well, as you did when you were working at RELEX. I think you still have a fan base at RELEX. So if you're looking for, new opportunities at some point, let's discuss. But yes, beyond all what you said, I tend to introduce myself as the most boring person on earth. So there's surprisingly little to know about me. I'm an engineer at heart. I like problem solving. I like figuring things out. And for me, RELEX has in many ways been a vehicle to do that at scale. And that's still super rewarding. I really enjoy figuring out how to get things done, both, from an organizational perspective. That's maybe more what I need to do nowadays, but then also finding clever solutions to supply chain challenges. That's really still super exciting. And I still get huge kicks when we can measure an impact at a client or find a kind of elegant solution to a complex problem. That's really what kind of drives me.
That's really cool to hear that even after 2 decades that you've been up and running, you still get the kicks. And I think that's really the key to live a fulfilling and meaningful life. All right, so you mentioned scaling. That's actually the topic, partly the topic of today. We're gonna talk about successful scaling. Obviously, it's a really broad topic. We were not gonna cover successful scaling in a 1 hour time slot, but I was thinking that it would be nice to try to cover it from the business perspective, from the product perspective, and also like the people and scaling the organization. So hopefully the audience will get a still like a wide idea of like how you've done scaling during the 2 decades. But to begin with, like, let's go back to the roots. Tell us how RELEX was born.
Yeah, so you already kind of hinted to it. Us 3 co-founders, myself, Mikko, and Michael, we're working as researchers in the same research group, and we actually did research on multiple different topics. Most of them were, focused on supply chains, and especially consumer goods supply chains. And then one topic, for example, we looked at was automating store forecasting and replenishment. So instead of having people walk around the stores, placing orders on their PDAs, we saw that companies were automating this, but they had kind of done the simple things, canned foods, nothing much happens, fairly simple to automate, but they had not even the kind of biggest, brightest retailers had managed to automate fresh products or seasonal products or products with promotions. And we felt that, well, this is, something where computers typically would do a much better job than humans. So with more complexity, more factors to take into account, you usually, the human brain isn't just wired to solve those problems on the fly. So that was one area we looked into, and that was then actually kind of the seed to starting RELEX. And that's where the kind of first 100 lines of codes went. That was a research tool. I can promise you none of it ever made it to the RELEX product. So everyone's safe out there. But that was something I used to work together with a partner company to show them that you can actually kind of do these simulations and you can test out what happens if you change something. You don't need to try it out in a store and be like, wow, ooh, that was unexpected. So that was the kind of first thing we took with us when we founded RELEX. We felt that there is a better way to do these things, but it's also super slow to impact the world by writing research papers. The whole research process is very, very slow. And then, for people to read it and, pick up the ideas and implement it, we felt that it's not that meaningful in some ways to do this kind of applied research when you're trying to do new things. So then it was actually Mikko who started talking when we both kind of finished our dissertations at the same time. And Mikko was like, Mel, maybe we should just take this idea and see if we can turn it into something. And, then you can fast forward almost 2 decades, not that much yet, but almost 2 decades. And here we are. So we started
turn it into something.
Something, yeah. So we started with the store replenishment and then we kind of moved upstream because it makes sense to have the distribution centers in the same system. And now with our kind of latest acquisitions, we've moved upstream into manufacturing. And then at the same time, we kind of expanded within retail because we saw that, how our clients plan, for example, space in stores. So how much space do you give to different products that has impacts then on how you should replenish those stores. So we went into space and then promotions. And now the latest thing we've been working on is pricing. So all of these are kind of tied together. And that's the kind of nice complex problem to solve that it takes you this far if you solve the supply chain stuff, but then you can still mess it up with the wrong promotions or pricing and so on. So the outcome is just better when you can manage all of these different moving parts.
Yeah, It's I think it's super interesting that it actually like it's a product that, well, first of all, like when I joined RELEX, I didn't know what the company does, but then it was crazy like thinking how many people are somehow affected by, like, if the biggest grocery retailers, for example, use it for so many different purposes. It's actually very present in almost every person's lives in Finland, for example. So it's a really cool, this like back office system that is just running our everyday life in a way.
Yeah, nobody sees it, but if we make a
Exactly.
mistake, it's going to be quite visible. I did the kind of
Yeah.
a back of the envelope calculation that we manage some like 1,000 billions of goods flows through the
Yeah.
system. So that's massive.
You don't even understand the scale really. So you mentioned that you're like, or you explained briefly, like you've been expanding both like upstream in the supply chain, but also you've been expanding the inside retail, like the scope of the product. Did you have this like vision in your head when you did write the first line of code? Did you have the vision that at some point it will be something like this, or has it sort of evolved over the years that, hey, this has an effect to this and this has an effect, so let's expand the product?
Yes, it's very much been like step by step and discovering and learning more. So when we started from the stores, it was because there was kind of this glaring gap. There was like a no-brainer need to fill this
Yeah.
gap. And then many people told us that no, don't go into, distribution centers because they already have systems. Stores don't have, but DCs do have. But then we realized that yes, they have systems, but they have bad systems, and bad systems are not connected to the stores. So then it was like, then we need to, control this part as well. So it's more been a discovery that, if we fix this part, where are the remaining problems coming from? And then it's
Yeah.
like, okay, now then there's this part. Can we fix it? Can clients fix it themselves? Is there good solutions out there? Or maybe we need to fill that gap. So it's been a very much kind of a learning by doing. And
Yeah.
when you optimize something, you kind of find out what that was causing, and then you see clearer what the remaining parts coming from, and then you can kind of focus on addressing that.
Yeah, makes sense. You've also been bootstrapping quite a long time. Like it was really late on when you raised your first round in or from a VC. What was the decision? Like, why did you choose to do it like that? And did you ever consider VC funding in the beginning?
Yeah, so we bootstrapped for about 10 years. So we raised funding in 2015, and that was with a very clear purpose. It was aimed to be the kind of backbone, the reserves needed to enter the US market. So up until then, we had been growing in Europe into several markets, but we applied a kind of fairly conservative way of go-to-market. So very limited kind of fixed cost and quite organic growth based on what traction we see. But then going to the US required a much more aggressive go-to-market, and it also required us to duplicate several teams that, in Europe you can do quite a lot of things from Finland. It's, you don't have a multitude of time zones, distances aren't that long, but then for the US we needed to have quite a lot of the kind of support staff that for Europe we had in Finland, but then needed to kind of just build those teams in the US as well. So that's why we needed the money. We had been growing kind of cash flow positive up until then, but we kind of realized that it's not possible, at least for us, it wouldn't have been possible to enter the US market without additional funding. We did look at funding, or at least have, short conversations about it back in the day, like in the seed stage. But then we felt that, well, it's quite a lot of work to, get even like 200,000 from as, a seed investor in the really early phase.
Yeah.
And then we felt that maybe if we just spend the same time and energy, we'll get the same money from, paying clients, and then learn a lot more about their needs. And for us, I think that was a good choice. But it's easy to say when things have played out well.
Yeah. But how did you manage it in the beginning? Like you said, like, yeah, getting the paying customers and learning from them, but it's a really complex product. So how were you able to be cash flow positive in the beginning, since you have such a complex and like a really big product to build?
Yeah, I have to, no, again, don't hold this against me. It's a beautiful state-of-the-art platform nowadays. But
It's
it
not
maybe
always been that
wasn't
way.
exactly that in the first implementation we did. So
Yeah.
I think we had something quite, to be honest, back in 2006, when we did our first implementation, we have something very rudimentary that kind of solved a very real problem, but didn't do it in a very fancy way or, a super scalable way or anything like that. So it was more like the classic minimum viable product that anyone was, okay to put in production, rather than the bestest, finest thing on earth. So I think that's one reason that it was just a completely different product. And then of course it helped to have 3 co-founders that you don't need to pay all that much. So that maybe it might have contributed to the really kind of early years profitability. You have this kind of low cost labor of Finnish PhDs.
Yeah. How far along were you? Like you already said that it was a really like not that advanced when you started selling it to the customers. Did you build it? Like, do you consider that you built it with the customers, or how was the sort of like product building with the customers in the beginning?
Yeah. So basically, every client we landed was also an R&D project. And we started out from Finland, one of the kind of smallest markets in the world. We did not have the luxury to be like super niched. So I think our first client was consumer electronics. And then I think it was agricultural retail, bookstores, and then car tires. So they all had their like unique challenges. And then we just needed to figure out how to do things. The good thing here is that we got exposed to quite a lot of variation. So we quite early on realized that we need to have a lot of flexibility built into the product, because we're going to see even more variability. And if we can make things so that you can actually configure rather than kind of change the underlying source code, we are able to accommodate these kind of unique challenges that different clients have and still have one product, because that was really the goal. We need to have one product for all clients, otherwise this will not scale. But yeah, every client was a kind of R&D undertaking for the first, maybe I'd say about 3-4 years at least. And that's when we kind of then at about late 2009, we started venturing outside of Finland, because we felt that now we actually have a kind of repeatable product delivery rather than an R&D project.
Yeah. I came across, when you recapped your last year, I came across this number that you've had 66 quarters of consecutive growth, which is, I think everybody that is on the line understands that it's a ridiculous number. Like it's really like, I don't think there's many companies that could say the same, especially considering the past years, like what kind of turbulence it's been on the market, and it hasn't been a stable market situation for many companies. So how do you see, like, what's been the role of the SaaS business model in making that happen?
Yeah, SaaS is is quite important to them, because then you have at least some kind of stability in your finances. That said, it also relies heavily on satisfied clients that want to stay with you. And I think for us, that's been key. That's been like the biggest thing, that we typically don't lose clients. Of course, the kind of harsh retail reality with first the pandemic and then inflation and whatnot, we've seen some clients do Chapter 11 in the US, for example, especially highly leveraged retailers, and suddenly debt is super expensive. So there's been some casualties, but in general, we can kind of rely on having a happy, satisfied customer base that wants to stay with us. And I think you can't really, overestimate how big a driver that is. And that, I think, is just key.
Yeah. I remember reading Mikko, the CEO and one of the co-founders, saying in Helsingin Sanomat article once, like, if you just, or was it, I don't remember which magazine it was, but like, if you just deliver to the customer what you've promised, they are usually happy. Like, I think it's just a funny way of thinking about it, that it should be in a way like just everybody should do it. Like, you shouldn't deliver something else that you promised, but it's just like that can even be a competitive advantage, that you deliver what you promise and be just honest about it.
Yeah, but it's actually surprisingly difficult in some ways. So as you mentioned in the beginning, I've had the luxury of trying out many different roles. And that's great. With starting companies, there isn't that many people around you, so you have to kind of try things, also things that you may not know how to do. But I, for example, did sales for many years. And one thing I noticed was that clients were like just super happy when we followed the agreed timelines. Like, if I've promised to send something on Thursday, I've really, really made sure that it arrives on Thursday, or preferably on Wednesday if I can make it. But kind of simple things, but still it's not always easy to do, especially if you have to go back and work with several peoples, and it's a bit more complicated than you thought, and this and that. So it's kind of easy to say that let's just deliver what we promised to deliver. Then reality can be quite a lot more challenging than that. But I think it's still a super guideline to have.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, you've been doing sales. If I don't remember incorrectly, I think you opened the first new market in Sweden, right?
Yes.
The first international expansion. You, as a Swedish-speaking Finn, obvious choice of going there and
I think that was
Swedish.
my main qualification for that job.
So, how did you make the decision to, like, when was the right time to actually you already kind of covered like when was the right time to expand, but how did you choose, like, it's Sweden that where we should go, and talk us through the process?
Oh, there wasn't much of a process. It was mostly, we were actually under a bit of pressure to go international. We had received Business Finland internationalization grant with some milestones, and going international was the whole point.
Surprise.
So the clock was ticking, and I looked around. When you have a very small office, you can look around and see everything, and I didn't see anything happening. so that was like, well, Sweden. Let's try Sweden, and managed to get hold of company lists by vertical. So here are retailers, and then addresses like these are located in Stockholm. And then I picked out Stockholm and started cold calling and cold emailing. And when some kind people replied, I invested in plane tickets and went to visit them. So that's really how got started. Then when we got a bit more traction, we could hire some employees in Sweden, and then I did the same thing for Norway. And then we got that going and hired some people, and then I actually managed to hire our first employee in Denmark, and then I went on maternity leave. And that was the end of my sales career. Then I switched to marketing randomly.
Very successful sales career in the Nordics.
Yes.
So how about then, I think this is a interesting topic to many, but you already mentioned the US, like getting the VC funding for scaling into US. How has that been? How have you, like, what have been the factors that have made you successful in the US? Because it's not easy.
It's not easy. It definitely isn't easy. I think one piece of advice we got from several sources with regards to US go-to-market was that you absolutely need to send one of the co-founders there to get it off the ground. And we did that. So Michael ended up spending several years in the US and kind of building the team and meeting with the clients and all that. And I think that was super important for us from several perspectives. One was getting that like really honest, unfiltered information exactly of what's going on. So not the happy joy. Any month now, any quarter now, things will start happening.
Yeah.
But rather the person that's in it with you and sharing things exactly as they are. And what's working, what isn't working, where do we need to develop, where do we need to change the product, where do we need people, all that. So just having that real-time unfiltered communication, but then also building the culture, because work culture is different in every place. But in the Nordics it's quite similar. Then across Europe, it's already different in different countries, and the US is very different.
Yeah.
So just kind of, I wouldn't dare to say that we have the same culture in the US, the Nordics, or for example, Southern Europe, but at least there's like a shared core. And I don't think that would have been possible without having Michael and then some of our kind of key seasoned RELEXians relocating from Europe to US to build this thing. But then with clients, I think it's pretty much the same story everywhere. You need a bit of luck, you need a bit of good timing, and the harder you work, the better your chances are that you will get lucky and have the right timing. So we managed to land a few kind of marquee clients quite early on. We really, really, did everything we could to land those clients and a bit more. And then, try to do everything within reason to make them like shining examples of successful implementations. And I think that's, of course, imperative, because people do look for references that are relatable, and maybe you even know someone at that company. So I think those were super important.
Yeah, I think those are good points. And it was nice to see, like, when I was working there and people were moving from Europe to it's also a nice career opportunity for you.
Yes.
To be able to spend maybe some months, maybe a few years, maybe, I don't know, for the rest of your career in the US. Like, just it's a really nice opportunity for them as well, not just, and it also benefits the company, obviously, because the culture then sort of, there is some kind of a shared culture there. And I have to say that I know like many ex-colleagues from RELEX that are in the Atlanta office, and they're like, they haven't seen any US company ever that would have a culture like this. So even if it's not exactly like the replica of what we would have in Finland or in Europe, they still think that it's like miles away from the traditional US company that they have been working with previously. So I think that's really nice.
Absolutely.
Is there something regarding the US expansion that you learned the hard way?
I think that probably many, but one thing where I think we were too slow to realize was the differences between European retailers and US retailers. And that's kind of our specialty. It's our bread and butter. But it took us a while to understand how decentralized many of these like enormous US retailers are. And we felt that they must be moving to a more centralized model, like most European retailers, because it makes sense. We just kind of underestimated how long a journey that is and how much kind of cultural resistance there is to such a big change. So I think in hindsight, we should have adopted a different approach and adapted the product faster. But you know, it is what it is. But that's one thing that I feel is a bit embarrassing, because our job is to understand clients' need, and we kind of failed a bit, I think, in that respect.
Yeah. I also know that you've scaled with the help of partners. Why is that, and how have you made it work? Because that's also, besides the US expansion, working with partners is not always easy. So how have you made that work?
It's definitely not easy, and it's been kind of a long time coming. So already quite early on, we did start discussions with potential partners, because we know they can have quite a lot of influence, for example, with clients. If they are in the kind of trusted advisor position, they have a whole lot of kind of unofficial power, can influence decisions quite a lot. But in the early days, we worked mostly with, smaller companies like mid-sized retailers, and had these like tiny implementation projects. So there wasn't really anything much to collaborate on. So I think that's been the biggest change from those days, that now that we're working with the kind of biggest companies in the world, implementations, including change management and integrations and so on, they are just big undertakings. So there is much more for the partners to gain from working with us. So I think that's kind of simple explanation of why now is that we are more attractive as a partner to them. There's just more to share in some ways. And then, of course, from a scaling perspective, yes, partners make things a lot easier. You don't need to have your own staff on the ground everywhere in the world. And of course, we've been expanding not just in Europe and the US, but also in Asia Pacific, Latin America. There's language requirements, there's cultural differences. You need to understand kind of the working environment, and to build all that up within the same company, versus finding good partners, then the kind of latter is so much more scalable.
Yeah. Obviously partners help with the like onboarding and implementation work with new customers. But how have you scaled how have you sort of like made sure that the onboarding and implementation is as scalable as possible at RELEX? Like if you now exclude the partners, like your customer success team and so on.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of $1 million question. I think it's still a work in progress. With the pandemic, we changed onboarding like completely. Before that, we had actually flown everyone into Helsinki when they started, both for kind of culture building reasons, but also maybe a bit lazy, gathering everyone, going through the same things, and then sending them home. we had to go to online learning at that point. And it was probably not the most beautiful thing we set up right at the start of the pandemic. Now we have these nice, e-learning systems, and you get enrolled to courses that, you have basic stuff for everyone, and then role-specific things, and then, phased things that this is what you do in your first month, and then after a couple of months you can go deeper into these other topics and so on. So I do think that we've made great progress in that area, but the challenge with e-learning is, of course, that people are individuals. So what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other person. So now we are actually investing quite heavily in revamping quite a lot of our trainings to make them less like e-lessons and quizzes, and more, you learn, you try, you learn, you speak with people, you learn, you try. So building in a lot more of that kind of old school, where you sit with the person and kind of shadow them, but in a scalable way. But there's still a lot of work to be done in that area. So it's not an easy thing.
Then thinking about the work that the customer success people, for example, they do with the customers when they when you get a new deal, they start implementing RELEX. How do you see, like, I hope and I know that the process of getting the new customer onboarded and sort of up and running, that has sped up quite a bit over the time. So it's been quite heavy to implement in the beginning, but then you've done some actions to make it more scalable in that way. So can you tell us a bit more about those?
Yeah, I don't think there's been any revolution in that sense. The most time-consuming part still tends to be a fairly kind of simple task, but getting the master data, the transaction data from the client system into our system, and finding the time to properly validate that this is what it's supposed to be. That's surprisingly time-consuming still today. And it's not a technology issue. It's super easy to get, a data field from one place to another. But really, it's tedious work understanding how transactions have been mapped in an ERP system, and if this exotic transaction needs to go somewhere or not. So it's a lot of nitty-gritty detail. Then for the actual kind of onboarding the users, we use quite a lot of e-learning there as well. Which I think is actually quite good, because then people can go back and rewatch things. But there we found that we introduced our own kind of Gen AI rebot chatbot that has access to our kind of all of our internal documentation on the product. That has sped up onboarding. So client users, instead of being a bit shy and maybe, do I dare to ask about this thing? They can engage with the chatbot to figure out that what does this parameter actually do, and what happens if I change this, and if I would like to see this happening, what are some approaches I could consider? So there's an area where we've seen super nice impact. So onboarding new users.
Yeah, that's great. Then a few questions still about the scaling the organization. So I am like one example of those that have been able to grow inside the company. So I think when I joined, there was lots of like quite fresh leaders in the company. So people that have maybe joined after graduating and then growing like to bigger roles and getting more responsibility as the company was scaling. I think it's a great example as well that the chief product officer, Tommy, is like, what was he like, first employee or first summer employee or something back in the days, and now he's the chief product officer. So there's lots of those examples of people like really growing to bigger roles. So it was only like, I would say like fairly late that you started bringing these like external profession, like people that are professionals already outside RELEX, and then you bring them in to tell you how things should be done. So why was that like a decision that you made like on purpose, or was this sort of like it just happened that way, or why was that?
I think there's a very kind of pragmatic reason behind me.
Cost of
Cost,
labor.
yes. Like if you, for example, look at a very seasoned SaaS, business to business sales leader, those are very expensive people.
Yep.
So you need to have a certain volume to kind of make sense of that investment. And you also need to have challenges where you need that sales leadership really to solve those challenges. So the challenge is not that you don't know how to do sales. It has to be more about the managing and setting the organization, the targets and the processes and that sort of thing. So I think we hired our sales VP of EMEA in 2019, and that was kind of the first person to join the leadership team that was kind of not homegrown in some sense. And since then, actually Ron in the US operations was the first one in the extended leadership team. So I think at that point on, we started scaling again in a different way and could really kind of leverage the expertise that people who have seen what good looks like bring to the table.
How was that then culturally? Like, since it's a very if it's a homegrown organization with like everybody is just basically aware of how life is like at RELEX, but not outside RELEX. So were there any like clashes or anything that it like caused some trouble there?
Of course, we still have heated debates in our weekly management team meetings, and I think that's a sign of a well-functioning management team meeting, because if everyone just nods and somehow agrees, that means that you haven't given that thing any thought, because the things that we discussed are typically quite complex and there tends to be many sides to the issues. But one funny story is when Stefano joined. Stefano is our sales VP of EMEA and now also the manufacturing part of the business. He's very Italian. We all love him, but that did clash a bit with the Finnish communication styles. In the first management team meetings, Stefano talked a lot because he was kind of feeling that because nobody reacted to what he was saying, you have to kind of rephrase it to see if people get it, and then maybe try a third time. And then you had these Finns waiting for a pause because you're not supposed to interrupt anyone. So we were just sitting there and waiting that Stefano stopped talking at some point. I do have something to add. So the first couple of management weeklies were a bit of a disaster. But since then we had some, honest feedback both ways, and everyone has kind of learned to navigate this better. So I think now we Finns know how to interrupt people when needed. And Stefano is actually really good at taking pauses when he's said something. So everyone around the table has learned something.
Compromise. Then a few more questions before I hope that we get a few. We don't currently have any questions in the Q&A tab, so please write your questions there. But I have a few more in the bank for you. So what do you wish you would have known when you founded RELEX? Like now looking back at everything that you've learned and you've tried and you failed and you succeeded. So what would be something that you would highlight that would have been great to know at that point?
Actually, I'm going to twist this around and say that I'm still super glad that I didn't know too much, because if I had known, how formidable the competitors are, what all cool things they could do when we just had that, slightly embarrassing minimum viable product. If we had understood all the work it takes to sell to, for example, these huge retailers, I don't know if it had made sense to even start trying to do this whole thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, that's very true. What do you then think that you've done differently compared to your customers? Like there are some, competitors. So there are some really big competitors out there for you. Lots of resources, big corporations. So how has this mighty small company from Finland been able to compete with them and win their customers?
I do think it actually goes down to the technology choices we made early on. So one thing is SaaS. We kind of entered the market at the right time from that perspective. So we opted for the SaaS option when the norm was still kind of licenses. And we actually had to kind of educate clients quite a lot about, why SaaS, why is it better for you? Why does it make sense? But that also meant that many of our competitors had a huge, and some of them still do, a huge installed base of old on-premise solutions. And it's difficult to navigate having something new that you should invest in, and then you have hundreds or maybe thousands of clients on the old system, all wanting some development to that. So it's not easy. So I do think that we had good timing in that sense, entering the market when we did, and kind of starting with SaaS early on. And then we were super early with embracing in-memory computing, and that gave us both scalability and flexibility. That was just astonishing compared to competition. Again, people, adopt these things, but that really gave us a huge head start. So I do think it's, classic saying that Finns are good at building things and suck at selling them. I do think that much more of our success is tied to the product than our kind of go-to-market excellence. But then I do think we've done a decent job on the go-to-market side as well.
Yeah. Happy customers and good product. That's a really good combination. A final question now, coming back to the 66 quarters of consecutive growth. If you had to choose 3 decisions or factors or actions or themes, maybe you choose good product and happy customers, but you need to come up with a third one if you choose those 2. So which ones have had the biggest impact on the making that a reality?
I think it actually goes back to values. This sounds a bit, cheesy and fluffy and intangible. But I do think the biggest decision from a kind of co-founder perspective is who you found a company with and what you are aiming to do. And for us, it was never about the money. It was never about the exit. We didn't have an exit plan. We still don't have an exit plan. But it was really about doing something cool, and being nerds. Cool for us is solving problems, not like hyping things or being cool in the normal people's way. So I do think that that's been kind of the thing that has set the tone for everything we've done since. That all of us have wanted to do the same thing. And that's kind of, then we've probably attracted other people who want to do the same thing. And it's less about, you know, being in the spotlight or making a lot of money, and much more about solving those cool problems.
Yeah. And it's a really value-based company in general. Like, I think any employee that would be waking up during the night and they would need to come tell their company values, like in a nanosecond, they would know what they are, because it's just so in the backbone of the company so deeply. And I think it's a really great thing. Now would be a good time to ask any questions. I can see that there's still an empty it's an empty tab. I think we're gonna continue discussing for another couple of minutes to see if some questions appear here. I really encourage you to ask, because it's a very unique opportunity. Johanna is not very active on speaking on any of these like live events, so it's a really rare chance to get her input on some things. But yeah, it's I'm still a huge fan of RELEX, and I think most of the people who've been working there have always been super invested in it. And I don't know, it's been just like a very unique company culture in general.
Yeah, I think my aim when it comes to, you know, the workplace is, first of all, I think everyone has to be mindful that we all have lots of things in our lives, and work is one of them, and it can be an important part, but it should never be your whole life. So it's kind of a fair trade in that sense, that you can't, you know, expect employees to be like super loyal and everything unless you do something to earn that. So I think it's very much a two-way street. And then we have had a lot of young talent for whom this has been the first kind of real job. And then I'm never sad that they choose to leave at some point. It makes perfect sense. But I'm super happy when we have these boomerangs that come back.
Yeah,
you know,
there's a lot of them.
2 or 3 years later, that, you know, this was my first job. I never saw what it was like on the outside, but now I know, and I actually want to come back, and that makes me happy. Of course, I would wish that all workplaces would be great. But then the other thing I really like is when we can find these new opportunities and roles for people to you know, learn new things. So I'm actually now working with a sustainability team, and one of my team members is Svante, who was my #1 employee in Sweden. So he's also done lots of things in RELEX, and now we kind of came back to the same team, and we really enjoy working together again after, you know, several years of doing other things. But then finally also, I'm super happy always when I see that, you know, a RELEXian moves on in their career and, you know, takes the next step. And we have people who have these amazing jobs, you know, left out of RELEX and continue to, you know, do great things. That also makes me happy.
Yeah, it's a great school. Like after your school, after you're done with school, you come there and it's a great school again. All right, I think I just take this as my question list was so comprehensive that nobody, like, I didn't leave any empty spots for anyone to know. So I take this as a compliment. But
mission
I know that
completed.
Exactly. I know you're super busy, so I'm really, really thankful that you were able to we were able to steal 1 hour of your time, and you were able to give back a little bit to the SaaS community in the Nordics and Baltics.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And for the audience, we have the next session, the second session of SaaS Camp tomorrow, and we'll have Lars Nordvall talking about successful sales or scaling the sales organization successfully. So we'll continue with the theme, but with a bit more focus on this time. But thank you so much, Johanna, for joining us, and all the
Thanks
best
for
to
having
you
me.
and RELEX.
Thank you. Bye-bye.